Well, I guess we could start by just introducing the agenda and ourselves. So my name is Audrey. I'll give a little more intro after we talk about the agenda. So today we're going to introduce ourselves, obviously, and go through a few housekeeping things. Then we'll talk about what growth marketing is and what it isn't, and then how you can implement a growth mindset. And then we'll end it off with a little case study with our client, Virta. So my name is Audrey, and I'm a content marketing strategist at Advanced B2B. And my background is I've done in-house marketing for a bunch of different tech companies out in Los Angeles who had a global reach. And I actually moved to Finland 2 years ago. It'll be my 2 years in a couple of weeks, actually. So that's why I'm at Advanced B2B. And I'm joined today by Samuli, and I will let him introduce himself.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Samuli, and I work as a director of digital sales and marketing at Virta. And I think it's probably my fourth in-house job that I'm working in. And I also previously worked at Advanced B2B for a couple of years. So let's say that I've seen both sides of the equation in that sense. Glad to be here today.
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, I did the opposite. I've always been in in-house roles, and this is actually my first agency role, so we've kind of flip-flopped there. But yeah, I think it's great. We're going to be able to give you some foresight into two different sides. So just a few housekeeping things. This webinar is being recorded, so in case you have to leave or anything like that, or you miss something, you'll be able to watch it afterwards. If you have any questions, we will try to get to them at the end. So just drop them in the chat and we will try to field them at the very end. And yeah, just sit back and enjoy. So let's get started. Growth, marketing, and growth hacking. So let's address the elephant in the room here. These terms are used interchangeably, but they mean different things, or at least the angles are different. Growth hacking is often driven by product and is more typical for early products to hack their growth, while growth hacking often looks for quicker wins and to get a product basically out there. Growth marketing is about sustainable growth. Both are equally valid, and depending on the situation, one could work better than the other. An iconic example of growth hacking is when Dropbox offered 250 megabytes of extra storage to any user that invited a friend, if that friend created an account. This incentive got the signups to soar by 60% almost overnight. Each new user cost Dropbox only 500 megabytes of disk space. Talk about a low cost of acquisition. More recently, I'm sure you guys have all heard of Clubhouse, the new audio app, and it's spread like wildfire through their exclusive invite-only model. The term hack has its background from tech companies that often have a product team, but no marketing team. So the product team came up with ideas on how to generate users, test product market fit, and quickly iterate their product. Maybe that's also why we talk about hacking, a term that has its roots in engineering. Anyway, this webinar is not about growth hacking, but on a side note, I do believe some people think of growth hacking as like a silver bullet for magical growth, immense revenue and happiness ever after. But sorry to break it to you, that just doesn't exist, not in growth marketing and not in growth hacking. So yeah, that's like a little tidbit on what we feel is a difference between growth marketing and growth hacking. Like Samuli, what's growth marketing to you?
Well, the way that I would define growth marketing, that it's mainly a framework which enables you to identify what is and what is not working and bringing business results in terms of marketing and partly also sales or product activities. So personally, I view it mainly just as a framework that enables you to do different things. And basically, it requires a lot of measuring, obviously, because otherwise it's impossible to know what is actually working and what isn't.
Yeah, totally agree.
I think what you mentioned about the growth hacking viewed as a silver bullet, I think you're right on point there, because a lot of times, whether it's growth hacking or any other new fancy acronym of marketing, people view it as it's some sort of like a new magic trick that only very few people are able to do, and it will bring enormous results. And I think that's exactly what happened with growth hacking a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So exactly what you said, more than anything, I think we've grossly misunderstood the concept of growth. Many people who used to be a digital marketer all of a sudden are growth marketers, but a lot of what they still focus on, I think, is lead generation. But what is growth really? How do we measure business growth, as you mentioned? So in our next slide, I think many of you have probably heard of this. It's the leaky bucket syndrome. So as I said, when growth marketing is brought up, a lot of people still think of like lead generation. And so many of you have probably heard of this metaphor, but if you haven't, this figurative bucket is your sales funnel, and the liquid it contains is your inbound leads. And the leads represent the leads that actually don't become revenue. So to keep market share, you have to continually bring in new customers to replace the customers you're losing. This keeps the bucket full, or at least it slows the leaks down. But we've basically just been pouring more water into a leaky bucket and letting customer success or other teams clean up the mess. After all, like, we did our part, now they can do theirs, right? So no surprise here, but this won't work. At best, a leaky bucket represents lost opportunities. And at worst, it can prevent your business from attaining growth and profitability. To grow share, you have to be really good at new customer acquisition, or you have to slow down the leak. But regardless of what you do, customer leakage will always happen, like no matter what you do. So it's really essential to focus on customer acquisition to fill the bucket at a faster rate than it leaks. So it doesn't matter how good you are with performance marketing or growth hacking. If you're acquiring the wrong people, in the long run, this just won't work. So while it's virtually impossible to turn 100% of your leads into conversions, you can alter your marketing strategy so more of those curious prospects become loyal customers. If you guys have heard of like product-led growth, in product-led growth, like what we promise in our marketing and sales is the perceived value, while what we deliver in our product is the actually experienced value. Ideally, the perceived value aligns with the experienced value, but this is rarely the case. And most companies struggle with over-promising and under-delivering, which causes a nasty value gap. So the bigger your value gap, the leakier your funnel or your bucket. So you'll see users but never return to your product. But tackling your value gap is a crucial lever that you can pull. And in the SaaS industry, there are three main reasons why value gaps are so prominent. So it's either because your product has really big ability debt, you don't understand why your customers buy, or you overpromise what the solution is actually capable of. So as marketers, it's our job to really understand our ideal customers and then find those good fit customers and clearly communicate our product or services value. So it's time to hit the reset button on marketing. Marketing shouldn't just be about the beginning of our buyer's journey so that we can pour leads in for sales. And let's pause for a moment on growth. All too often, I think marketing is seen as a cost center, and we can, I mean, I've done it too. I think we can try to blame other departments for not understanding the value of marketing, but really in the end, it's our job as marketers to connect everything that we do to business value and speak the language of the stakeholder at hand. So if you're talking to the CEO, you want to talk to him about what's important to him. If you're talking to CFO, you want to talk to her in her language. She's going to want to know about the money. So what that ultimately means is connecting marketing efforts to revenue. Let's put a pin on that, as we will get back to that on how we're able to do that when we talk to Samuli about a case study with Virta. So what I'm trying to say is basically marketing should operate along the entire customer cycle, and that marketing can and has the potential to be a primary driver of growth. So how can we do that? I know this sounds nice, but how can we actually do this? Like, this webinar, after all, is called Beyond the Hype, after all. So let's get to something a bit more practical. This is our growth marketing formula. And this is something that, you know, we've kind of come up with based on the work that we've done with our customers. And this is, you know, basically it's kind of what Samuli alluded to earlier. So growth has two key elements, and when we leverage them in the right way for each of our own situations, then growth should steadily happen along the way. I think all too often when companies discuss growth, they forget the brand aspect. And to us, brand is not like just about good advertising. It's really much more strategic than that. It's about nailing your brand positioning, having a really strong vision, listening to your ideal customers, and delivering the right product for those customers. And you know your brand is on the right track when the right fit customers like easily understand the value you're providing. They don't try to haggle you on price. They immediately start getting buy-in from other people in their company. So when you have customers like that, this leads to a more sustainable business, company, and brand. So brand isn't always that sexy creative scene that you see on Mad Men. Brand defines which circle you play in. If you don't actively position yourself, you'll put yourself in a corner and be compared to things that are imposed on you. So let's take a look at an example. Hopefully you guys have heard of cake pops. Cake pops positioning wise can be seen as cake. It's got the word cake in it after all. So obviously it's cake, right? But a cake is a big piece of gooey goodness. Cake pop is just a bite. It will never live up to the expectations put on cake. This is why cake pop needs to actively and consciously position themselves to manage expectations and define the frame of reference. Now, imagine you're a cake pop, but you don't do your positioning work. You will allow your competition to position you as cake. All the red velvet cakes and the likes will place you in their part of the quadrant. And of course, they're the ones who define the space. So you need to own your own position and shape it yourself. All too often, we slide into a positioning or category that doesn't accurately reflect our business. So don't be red velvet, be a cake pop. And now I'm hungry. But now on to the second part of the growth marketing formula, agile marketing operations. It's an experimentally driven way of working that is designed to establish the brand with existing customers, make them part of the brand, or to take the brand out there and get new customers. It's always about having a clear vision on what the brand is, who it is for, and equally important, who it's not for. And together, these two elements create a sustainable customer base that equals growth. So basically what that all comes down to is if you build a brand that is positioned right and manage to build a lean, mean, growing operations machine that works along all steps of the customer journey and after they become customers, then you can outperform your competition. So let's talk about now like kind of what like traditional marketing was and kind of what growth marketing is today and what has changed. In the past, marketing focused only on acquisition, especially a few years ago when we think about how important content marketing was. Back then, it was really all about generating leads. Any leads, it was like basically about numbers. And I still kind of cringe when I think about all those lost leads that sales never really picked up. So marketing was also often planned on a yearly basis. And when a plan was made, probably sometime in October for the next year, that plan wasn't like really flexible. And on top of that, the data was usually fragmented or non-existent and not used like very strategically, if used at all. And a good example of this is when you focus on like form fills and spend all your time reporting on those form fills, when there's like actually way more data beyond that, like which of these forms will become customers, how much pipeline was generated, how much of the annual recurring revenue bookings are generated through marketing. So in growth marketing, marketing is an essential part of the customer lifecycle, and the best marketing teams make their decision based on like actual data. So what that means is they continuously look at KPIs that reflect business value, but also marketing work. They create hypotheses on that, formulate different experiments, and then run marketing in an agile way. This just means basically instead of a yearly plan, like marketing is organized around data-driven findings and is always being adjusted. At advanced B2B, we basically do these in 1 month sprints. So every sprint, we're like reviewing what happened and making adjustments for the next month. So we don't have like, we might have like an overall overarching plan that we kind of use as our guide, but we're constantly kind of tweaking that strategy. So for us, this means growth marketing means like more cross-team collaboration, no more silos. Your whole company is your team and you can't succeed alone.
Because I think that one of the most common things that always is discussed, especially among marketers, is that the alignment between marketing and sales is not in place. And unless that process is working, no matter how great and fancy marketing actions you take, it's never going to lead into any measurable revenue if the process is broken. So one of the first things that I did whenever I joined Virta was that I really tried to study the process the way that how it's working at the moment, realized that there's really no process at all. And then I visited every single country where we have salespeople at, just to sit down with them and kind of go through their perspective of what is working, what is not working, so we can actually establish a process that people feel that there is a value in doing that. Because I think that's really something that whenever you want to drive any sort of a change, I like to call this bulletproof value that you need to prove to people, because otherwise they are not going to change the way that they behave unless they see that there is something in me for it in order to change that. So basically, right now our team is set up in a way that we have 10 people in my team. We have a few people who focus on the digital marketing side. Then we have a sales development team, which we set up last fall. And then we also have a brand marketing team underneath the whole digital sales and marketing unit. And the way that it works in our case is that basically whenever we identified earlier on that basically the biggest problem for us was the early part of the sales cycle, that even though we have really, really good experts in our company who are really good in what they're doing in sales, but we noticed that when it comes to prospecting and handling new leads, we were not as effective in that as we could have been. So the solution was to set up a sales development team that focuses only on that side of the whole sales cycle. And that really, really made the process better. It really helped us to understand what is working and what is not working, because then all of a sudden there's no this huge gap in between marketing and sales anymore that used to be earlier in the day. And also that really, really helps, because then we get an instant feedback loop between basically digital marketing and sales development constantly. So we stay on top of things that, what type of leads are we getting in? Are these of the right type of companies, and so forth and so forth. And then obviously then what we need to be working on constantly as well is how the handover from sales development works with sales. Because again, if you have some bottlenecks in the process that you are working towards and you're trying to measure everything as close to euros and dollars as you get, sometimes you find out that the problem is actually not only within your team. It might have something to do with the product. It might have something to do with sales. It could be customer service and so forth. So I think overall, the cross-team collaboration is really, really crucial. And I think this is something that marketing constantly fails in, even though we tend to be pretty good in understanding the bigger picture and understanding how things should be working. But when it comes time that you need to actually help the people to learn how to execute it and why they should be doing that, that's exactly what I meant with the bulletproof value, that whenever you want to drive change and you want to do something that is not directly under your control, but you need people to learn on new things, you need to be able to prove that whatever you're suggesting is providing them some value for their own work or some monetary benefit. And I think that's something that can be difficult to do unless you have some sort of measurement things in place that you can actually prove the value of your work in euros all the way to the C-level. Because then when these type of changes are required to take, obviously sometimes it might even need the board of directors to take action. And they are not going to listen to how many clicks you got with your new fancy Facebook advertisement. They are interested in that how much more revenue we're going to get this year if we make this change. And then all of a sudden it's a different discussion. So I think it's basically, when you think about how we've been able to build this type of function within Virta, it has really had a lot to do with the cross-team collaboration, and then being able to basically sort of be the translator in between marketing and sales and C-level and different business units. Because again, if we talk about clicks and block views, they are important tools in, understanding what works and what doesn't. But if you really want to drive this type of change within the organization, it requires you to go to different teams, different units, even different countries, and then sort of be able to prove your point that why is this valuable, why we should be doing things differently. Because, what we're talking about growth marketing, it's like you showed in the, I think it was the previous slide, where we had this basically comparison to traditional marketing. And a lot of people view marketing still the really traditional way. They think it's sort of like a function that does whatever sales asks them to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important to not only understand how things should be, but also have a clear understanding of how this can be executed in a way that, both teams are happy. Because, if we just go and show a fancy PowerPoint of how things should be, no one's going to change their actual behavior 2 days after the PowerPoint has been shown. You need to sort of be willing to go the extra mile for that, and also be able to prove your point in value. It could be euros, it could be dollars, it could be saved work hours, but it's definitely not going to be any more clicks and blog post views when you need to get other units working with you.
Yeah, much agreed. I mean, in my previous in-house roles, it was exactly super traditional. It was just sales telling me they needed this new presentation, they needed this brochure, they needed this whatever blog post. And if you're not brave enough to prove your value and understand like how to like show value, then that, that's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this has a lot to do with marketing leaders as well, because if you don't have, whether it's OKR or some other system in place that you use to actually be able to define what you should be achieving in a given quarter or a given month or a given year. And unless you're able to show the clear direction on what we should be saying yes to and what we should be saying no to, unless you have that sort of framework in place, it might easily turn into that marketing is just this new modern printer putting out stuff that you want to be shown.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's so important to know when to say no, and exactly. When to say yes.
yeah, exactly. I think the no is even more important.
Yeah, much agreed. Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide. So how can we become growth marketers? I think the good news here is that you probably have everything that you need to be a growth marketer. You just need to be able to figure out how to do that. So how can we do that? The first thing is that we need to understand all aspects of growth. So Samuli also mentioned this. You should start by identifying where your growth bottlenecks are and focus on that first. So if it's getting people to recognize your brand and visit your website, they just don't know who you are yet, then brand awareness and building trust through things like thought leadership should be your focus. If they already know who you are and you're having more trouble just converting traffic, then maybe focusing on things like conversion rate optimization on your website, or creating content and helping with the consideration and decision stages. If it's retention, then maybe taking a look at your onboarding process or your actual product features. But yeah, is there anything else you want to add to this part, Samuli?
I think there'll be plenty to add when those couple of other points are shown.
All right, yeah. So as I mentioned, these are I'm not sure which metrics you all are tracking. It once again depends on your business, and you need to basically measure what impacts your business. But here are two very important ones that I'm sure you've all heard of. You need to take a look at your customer lifetime value, ideally per source and per channel, and your acquisition costs also. Depending on what source or channel, because this will help in determining a sweet spot among your customers. And then we need to look beyond acquisition. As I said, this is the one thing that marketers can change right away. If you think about your existing customers, think about onboarding new customers, how can you help? We don't need to just help with the lead generation part of it. There's so much more that we can help with, especially if you don't really need all those leads now. You need to kind of just think beyond the acquisition part. And this is just a nice little quote that I like. Acquisition is easy, but the retention is the hard part. And as marketers, we've learned to let other people worry about retention, and we probably just didn't think it was our problem. So that leads us to our third point. We need to get closer to the business. Instead of looking at marketing vanity metrics such as form fills or clicks, like Samuli mentioned, you got to look at the metrics that are closer to your business and make sure your KPIs align with your company-wide business goals. And actually, Samuli mentioned this too. At Advanced B2B, we use the OKR framework to identify like whole company-wide objectives and key results. And then we have like 4 or 5 different teams. And within each team, we create our own OKRs that should be also driving towards reaching the same company-wide OKR. So they should be sort of like different goals and results, but they should all still be trying to align with the same ultimate goals of the business. So that way we're all we all have the same vision, we all have the same goals, like we're all working towards the same thing. And that helps us basically work on the things that matter and the ones that will, drive the most impact to the business. So I think now this is where probably somebody has probably a lot to say.
Yeah, I do have a lot to say. And I think I'm going to start off with a real life example that is actually quite recent. So basically we identified some time ago that we're definitely going to need a sales development representative who is able to speak German, because the DACH market it's really language oriented, and we need a person to start there. Original plan was to have the person hired already early this year. However, that didn't happen because there were several internal reasons for that, and we needed to push that recruitment forward. And then after it had got pushed forward by the HR a couple of times, we had a pretty good discussion about this with my manager. And basically the way that I framed the problem was that, do you understand that, given the goals which we have this year in terms of achieving a certain amount of revenue, not only this is slowing us down in reaching that, but I can already show you like a monetary example of how much money we are losing on a given month. So basically, by just measuring a lot of things, we're able to calculate that on an average, let's say our SDR brings in 150,000 euros worth of sales opportunities on a given month, and the closing rate is somewhere, let's say it's 20% in this example. So basically you can do the math. Eventually that should lead us to be getting roughly 30,000 euros per month as revenue from a single sales development representative. So if we push back this one recruitment, we've already pushed it back for 3 months. And then if we keep pushing it for another 3 months, and then that pushes the next recruitment that was planned with another 3 months, we can give a monetary value of each month that we are not hiring, and that is moving forward. I had this discussion with my manager, and we decided, okay, this is something that maybe we need to talk with the management, because this might not be as clear, because maybe some people view it as an investment in terms of that it's a cost, not necessarily an investment for the future that brings revenue. So I basically had this one presentation that really cut it down to numbers, that okay, this was the original plan, this is the plan that seems to be moving forward right now, and the monetary value that we had already lost by postponing this recruitment was over 400K. So surprisingly, 3 days after that, we have 2 new positions open for that.
Nice.
So this is basically that unless you get closer to the business in a way that you can break it down to numbers and then show actual whether you're losing money or making money or opportunities that you're missing. This is exactly the example that this is the language you need to be speaking in order to make things happen, whether it's directly under your control or not. Because you can bitch and blame all day long in Slack with your friends, and why aren't we doing this, why aren't we doing this? But then if you actually need to have this sort of changes, if you need to make them happen, then you need to basically speak the language that your audience is speaking. When our main goal in that sense is to gain a certain amount of growth on a given year, if you can show that decisions we're making are slowing us down in terms of growth, then all of a sudden it's a different discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's basically a good real life example of this, how you really need to be close to the business. And I think, like you mentioned, this type of framework that, whether it's OKR or something else, But when you're able to derive your own goals from the business strategy, then this type of discussions are not about your own goals anymore or about your team goals. They're overall company goals, because you can see the straight effect that, you know, the decisions we make or investments we make or we do not make have a direct impact on the end line.
Yeah. All right.
So
let's get some more tips. Yeah, because I think we have like 10 minutes left before we have to field some questions from y'all.
Okay.
So yeah, like let's talk about some actionable tips. So here are just some tips to get started so that you can get a growth mindset. As we said, align your marketing goals with your business goals to ensure you're working on the right things. And if you don't have business goals, push for those. Talk to the C-levels and create those. I recommend, like, you know, starting with an OKR framework. There are many different frameworks out there, but just, you know, pick one and try to get one. Map out your buyer's journey from not knowing about you to loving your product. Then you'll define where people actually fall off. And that's where you can kind of focus your efforts on. Formulate hypotheses around these and design different marketing experiments. But before running the experiments, determine the most meaningful KPI. So I think there's like a recurring theme here. You really need to measure things and to figure out and use that data accordingly. Yeah, so this is just like the way we run agile marketing at Advanced B2B. We do like a strategy phase first, where we identify your ideal customer profile through customer research. And then from that research, we basically build a growth marketing strategy and roadmap. And then we move into like monthly agile marketing, like sprints. And this is just one way to do it. There's many ways that you can do this. All right. Yeah, so really quick, I think before we get into the case study, I think a lot of times people are intimidated by doing like customer research, but it doesn't have to be this massive thing. Like I often start with just doing like 5 customer interviews. 10's a really good number to really start seeing some patterns. But if other departments don't think marketing should be talking to customers, my advice to you is to just bully your way in there into customer research. And I promise it'll be like 100% worth it. And in order to determine what you should be working on during a sprint, I'd recommend using a mix of strategic initiatives, but also very concrete actions. So that you can like deliver something while you're like testing things. All right, so let's move into the case study. All right, so a little bit about Virta. Do you want to talk about who Virta is, Samuli?
Well, yeah, basically we're a digital platform for electric vehicle charging businesses, and basically even though especially in Finland we're most visible in consumer segment, but actually who we are selling to is B2B companies, especially with energy, petrol, and real estate industries within Europe at the moment. Some actions also overseas, but mainly in Europe at the moment. And but yeah, basically like it's mentioned there, what we aim to do is we help B2B businesses launch, grow, and operate their own commercial services in the EV charging ecosystem. And usually for most companies, it's a value-added service in order to either add a revenue stream or, you know, enhance your customer happiness. But also whenever it comes to utility or energy sector, then obviously it's a different ballgame when it comes to being a primary business type of thing.
All right, so when we first started working with Virta about, I think it's like almost 3 years now, their major challenges were they needed to identify and understand their ideal customer profile. They needed to narrow down their target audiences to understand where to focus. They needed to increase their online visibility and grow brand reputation and credibility. And they also wanted to increase their inbound lead generation and have a proper foundation and strategy for inbound lead gen. So let's start with the results, actually. So I'm gonna let Samuli walk through this part of it.
Yes, so basically early last year, we had this common problem that, okay, we need to start measuring on what are we getting from digital channels in terms of euros. And, you know, at that point, it consisted of basically what is our investment in digital marketing and also our investment in digital sales. And, you know, this is a classic example of how that is usually kind of a difficult task. Like, how are you going to attribute or model basically the worth of your digital channels? So we started solving this problem by creating this so-called digital share equation. And like it's mentioned on the slides, it consists of 4 parts. And technically, this was done with HubSpot's calculated metrics within each deal that we had in our pipeline. And the way it worked is that anytime we had a new deal, it was sort of tested with these 4 things. And if you got a check mark that, okay, this thing exists, then we add a small portion of the deal amount, whatever is the, you know, the worth of the closed won deal, then we add a certain portion to the digital share and then started measuring that. So this, I think this was a really successful metric because of a few reasons. One was that this was by no means putting marketing and sales on the other sides of the table to compete against each other, because that can easily happen, especially if you have some sort of manual thing that salespeople are supposed to fill in whenever they close a deal, like, was this a digital deal or was this something that, you know, I created myself? Despite of what's the truth, I guarantee you're going to get 90% salespeople putting it, it's always a deal that they created by themselves, even though, you know, if it would have been a perfect inbound lead that's filling to their lap. So that's, you know, that just notoriously doesn't work. So this was something that was always running in the background, and it had nothing to do with, you know, salespeople's incentives or so forth, because that could have been creating a competition between marketing and sales. And this metric, just like any other metric, the main thing is not the actual, you know, worth of the digital share, but it was showing the direction of where we were going. Are we doing the right things? So basically, let's walk it through as an example. I think it's on the next slide. So for example, we get a pure inbound lead that downloads an ebook, then it ends up being contacted by sales and eventually ends up being a one deal worth of 30,000 euros. So the first point, original source. Okay, this is basically, it's a pure inbound lead. So yes, it's a digital from the original source. So we attribute 0.5 times the deal amount to the digital share. And then move on to checking out point 2. Do we know the first conversion? Because, you know, there are cases that some deals might start off as an offline deal, but along the way we can see that, okay, there was, for example, an ebook download or a, you know, webinar registration, something that we can see that there has also been an online conversion. So we attributed 20% weight for this. And in this example, if it's, you know, an inbound lead, well, yeah, they definitely downloaded an ebook. So yes, check mark for point number 2, and let's add 20% to that. Then if there were any digital prospecting tools used, sort of Vino, LinkedIn Sales Navigator or so forth, then we would also attribute 20%. But since this was a pure inbound lead, you know, no 0.3 percentage added. And then moving on to point 4, well, it's a pure inbound lead. They downloaded an ebook. Well, yeah, they did visit our website. We could track it. So we add 10% to that. So that adds up to being 80% total, 0.5 plus 0.2 plus 0.1, which would mean that from this specific deal, the digital share worth would have been 24,000 euros. So this was basically the way that we measured how effective our digital sales are. And this was also another reason why I think this was a pretty successful metric, is that this didn't only take into account the deals that, you know, were created this given year, or they didn't need to be completely new customers, but also from existing customers. You know, if we can track that, hey, they're pretty active, they've been, you know, joining our webinars and so forth, there's always a certain worth to that. So, you know, then we were also able to get some measurements out of those as well.
Yeah, I love this measurement. Let's go to the next slide, because I know we have 5 minutes. So yeah, what does that actually mean in numbers? Like, so I like to say, show me the money. So how did Virta do in 2020? The digital share went from 87K in 2019 to 2.25 million in 2020, so up 159%. The revenue generated in the pipeline from online channels went from 7.5 million to 16.4 million, so up 118%. And for every €1 we invested in like paid advertising, it resulted in 11.2 euros of generated in the pipeline. And if you go to the next slide, These are just showing like the number of deals that were created from online sources between 2019 versus 2020. So you can see it jumped up like almost 50%. And then these are just like website traffic results. So the number of sessions went up 68% and the number of new visitors went up 75%. And so, yeah, but how did we actually do that? let's give you a little glimpse into that. So we started working with Virta in 2009. So we did customer research, basically interviewed 7 of their customers and helped narrow down their ICP. This is still a work in progress. We built a growth marketing strategy based on that work. We've done 2 website refreshes on HubSpot. We did a bunch of conversion rate optimizations. We created a lot of SEO driven content. We did paid advertising. We did measurement on Databox and HubSpot. We helped them do their first webinar. And then we also helped build some like nurturing sequences in HubSpot. If you go to the next slide. So this is an example of like a pillar page that we created back in 2019. And it's like a top of the funnel brand awareness type of content. And the goal here is to drive traffic, not really do conversions. But you can see that it's steadily growing up until today. It just keeps on growing. And I think the thing that's like important to know here is like the importance of like or organic compounding growth, which makes growth much more sustainable because we're focusing on quality basically and the right things. If you go to the next slide. And this is another pillar page we created, and this is to drive higher intent visitors to download a BTG webinar and generate MQLs. And I think, Samuli, you mentioned that you got your biggest customer from this, right?
Yeah, I think last year, the biggest deal that we closed came from the V2G webinar, which we had, I think, in end of January, early February or so forth. And actually, I think basically what has since been our most effective piece of content, in my opinion, has been this specific pillar page, because it ranks really, really well in Google. And as we can see in traffic, it still keeps growing steadily. Yeah. So even though it has been there, I think, November 2019 when it was published. So yeah, I think this is really, really valuable piece of content for us because it's the V2G is such a hot topic in our industry at the moment. And it's, you know, the classic example of something that's really, really coming up in the industry and no one really knows what to actually do with it. So I think it's, you know, perfect for this type of content because it's something that people Google a lot and you can educate them, and the content is really, really good as well. So I think that combined with, you know, some material offers such as the webinar download and so forth, that has been really successful, I'd say, a content cluster for us, which also, like mentioned, resulted in our biggest customer last year.
Great. And it's about to be 45 minutes, but we only have a few more slides. So if you have to leave, no worries, but just a few more. This is an ebook that we created that you can see where the peaks are. We boosted those with like paid advertising campaigns and webinars. So you can see that when you complement like content with paid advertising, it really makes a difference. And this was like a bottom of the funnel type content, which was really, really targeted. So we didn't expect to see a large amount of page views, but there was a really high, like 13% conversion rate. Next. So this is just an example of a paid advertising campaign that we did, which we continually optimize and tested different things. And then we build new retargeting audiences with higher quality. So that one had like a 28.32 conversion rate, which is really, really high. And we also received like almost 300 submissions. And the total cost per submission was only $226, which is quite low. Next. And then the last thing that I'll mention here is we did 2 website redesigns for them. We did the content, all the content, the design, and the UX. So you can see how it was before we started, then the first refresh and the second refresh. So what have we learned so far? The customer interviews we ran were really helpful in narrowing down the ICP and building the initial growth marketing strategy and creating content that really resonates with those target audiences. Quality evergreen content that's continually optimized for SEO basically slow and steady wins the race here, and we're still continuing to see like an uptake on those visits for those pieces of content. We must continuously monitor and analyze website analytics and paid advertising efforts to see the things that should be stopped, optimized, or amplified. Recently, because we've been working more closely with like Samuli and the sales team, that's helped us focus our efforts on the audiences that make the most financial impact. So when we started, we were working with over 10 different segments, and now I think we're kind of focused on 4. And then after the website redesign and launch, it took us a while to dig deeper into how the new user paths work and what aspects of the user experience should be optimized. So we learned it's really important to continuously monitor and analyze the performance of the new website, not only on the content and SEO side, but from a UX perspective. And lastly, everything is just always a work in progress. So we're never done. There's always things that we're testing and experimenting and optimizing and amplifying and stopping. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I know we're over. If there's any questions, we can try to take like 1 or 2 before we end the webinar. So let me look in the chat. I don't see any questions. So, but yes, hello from Tampere. And it looks like somebody's mentioning a podcast on stop selling tomorrow's churn. So I will definitely take a look at that. But for those of you who are on the Clubhouse app, which we mentioned earlier, we're actually doing an after party on there to do like a live discussion. So we can talk further on there if you have any questions. And it looks like one question came up. Any tips about growing a stronger brand? So my first tip would be to really like to get to know your customers and understand like why they find value in your brand. And also like obviously the people who, you know, develop the brand and what their vision is for the product. So I think tying those 2 things together will really help you create like a stronger brand when you're talking to the people who really find value in your product. Samuli, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies would simply benefit from renaming their brand marketing team to positioning team, because that would actually tell you what is the problem that they're most often solving. And I think that's, you know, if you think about positioning and if you think about the brand, the best possible metric is that are you getting the right type of customers? And usually if you ask that from your VP of sales, he's going to tell you that right away, that, you know, are the customers that we're getting in, are they of the right type? And if not, then, you know, the discussion is already open that, you know, are we positioning ourselves wrong? Are we in the competition that we should be in? Are we compared to who we want to be compared with? And I think that's really, really, you know, then you need to really be really selective on what should you change in terms of your brand. It could be, you know, awareness, recognition, or it could be that people are not engaged with your brand enough that, you know, even though that they see you, they might be more annoyed of you than actually, you know, willing to engage with you. And in a lot of ways, I think, you know, this is one of the things that, as much as I love Don Draper, thinking about branding, you know, it's not the Mad Men stuff anymore that you come up with fancy creatives. It's definitely, you know, you should be have a more strategic approach. And I think that could be sometimes even more difficult than pushing, you know, your way into talking about business as a marketer. Then when you push your way into talking about, you know, company's strategic positioning, that can be even harder of a discussion when it comes down to that. You really need to nail it, because, you know, sometimes when you go to C-level and ask who should we not be selling to, you're not able to get the answer, especially in Finland. And the answer is usually that, well, we should be selling to everyone. And, you know, that doesn't help in getting the job done. So I think, you know, really, really good way to start off with when it comes to brand marketing is to start really thinking about strategic positioning more than anything. You know, are we at the table that we should be sitting in? And in a lot of ways, brand marketing is one of the notorious things that really, really takes time to adjust. I think it may or may have not been one of Advanced B2B's founders who mentioned this quote that, you know, there are things that just simply take time. You cannot rush in a baby by getting 9 people pregnant at the same time. That's just not going to work. And if my friend Jan happens to be online, you know, Jan, I know you're trying it. Stop it.
Yeah, maybe we can answer one more question. I think this is a good one for you, Samuli. How do you differentiate MQLs and SQLs?
I think this is one of the really classic things that people try to look for a universal definition of MQLs and SQLs. In my opinion, it should be an internal discussions within the company, whether you know what defines MQL for you and what defines an SQL for you, and should you even be measuring those, or should you rather be measuring the exact revenue you create in the pipeline and how much of that ends up being a closed won revenue. I think, whether it's MQL, SQL, or PQL that you want to be talking about, I think it's mainly, the main thing is to have an internal alignment and agreement that you definitely talk about the same, you talk the same language within the company. That's the most important thing. Then, sometimes it might make sense that a sales qualified lead is something that can be set automatically, that that if the sales team takes action, then automatically the lifecycle stage, or whatever you want to call it, turns to be an SQL. So that it has been something that the sales team has seen worth of taking their time to take some action upon. Sometimes it might make much more sense to have that as some sort of more strict definition. And I think it all comes down to your internal processes and how do you want to measure them. Sometimes, the way that companies define an opportunity, they get mixed up in that language that, they have the technical side of it, and then they have the actual side of it, what is a sales opportunity. And if those two are not the same thing, you're going to end up in trouble. So I think it's mainly about aligning a common language within the company that, basically you have an alignment and everyone knows what to do regarding that.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a meeting with our salesperson. His name is also Samuli. And we have this one blog post that generates us the most inbound leads, but it's been giving us not exactly our ideal customer. So we talked, directly with sales, how can we give you better quality leads so you're not trying to reach out to everyone, but you're only spending your time on the leads that really are a good fit for us. So, we have our own ICP of clients that we work with. So we are tweaking that blog post now to basically speak directly to our ideal customer. And then we've added a note, above it's like a CTA to book a meeting with our Samuli, which is if you are this type of customer, please reach out. If not, so we're getting really granular on it so that we can help get him better quality leads.
Exactly.
Just any leads.
Exactly. And people are usually so afraid of saying no to leads, even, whether it's online forum or something. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't be attracting the wrong type of leads anyway. So saying no, once again, could be really, really important thing here.
Yeah.
In order to make the process work.
But I think that's all the time we have. I think there was one more question. I can try to answer that offline, Dan. I think it's about specific conversion rates to ebooks. So I can look that up and get back to you after. And Lucy, I can add you on Clubhouse. So we're going to meet there in about 5 minutes. So for those of you who are on there, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. It was fun.
Bye.
Bye-bye.